All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this fine Sunday morning. Talk about little tests that have come my way. Get a little positioned up here. Some of the other little things that are going along. Hopefully, if you're new here, we'll give you a little run on what goes on. If let me pull this over, of course. If you are a patron, of course you can. Let me do this. And over here, you can check out the Discord. And of course, you can pop into the office hours or the voice chat here. If I see somebody pop in with any questions, we'll be able to address that. So, again, patrons in the patron only section of the UAV Tech Discord, check that out. Otherwise, if you are on the chat we will be hitting those questions as well in the uh, you know the good old YouTube chat dialogue. And I should, if I can do some quick cleanup here, and yeah, hit properties on this somewhere, right? Yep, nope, yep. Where is it? No, no either. Oh, it's down here. Yeah, live chat only. Properties here. Paste that there. Okie dokie. There we go. So we'll be addressing any questions in the live chat as well. Have a couple things to go over today in between the questions, and hopefully some people here. Hopefully you guys have questions. We'll see how it goes. It's been a little bit. Been some doing vacations, and summer's always a busy time. So trying to squeeze in a live stream here and just show some testing information that has been done in the Betaflight Slack as we're working on stuff, talking about sliders, things like that, making some revamps there. I got Brian White here as well, Mr. PID Toolbox himself. These tests come, courtesy of him. We were kind of going back and forth. Although I think he was doing the test because he had to see it to believe it kind of a scenario. But nevertheless, it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. And so we appreciate all those efforts. And yeah, the results kind of solidify things, I think, a little bit and helped us pick a good course and a direction to move forward. Hopefully, with this, we can talk about some really key fundamentals for PID tuning. One of the things that I don't know, it just seems like PID tuning is so simple to me that when people are like, "Oh, I don't know how to tune," it's like, yeah, but it's really simple. It's like two or three things you have to know, and then after that, that's kind of it. There's a couple sliders, it's like two or three of them. Once you move those around, you should be pretty good for like 90% of everything. So it's not that hard. It's not that hard. But yeah, we'll get to some. So Nick S asks UAV Tech, how about dynamic idle and thrust linear? Those are other more advanced features. I was trying to keep it a little lighter today on the PIDs themselves, but those are dynamic idle are just like icing on the cake for things. I would say that if you want to get into those features, that you would definitely not just you would definitely want to tune first and then worry about dynamic idle and thrust linear. Um, for extra performance and things like that. But I would not go to the kind of the advanced features without having the core stuff done first. So yeah, that's how I would approach those. But all good features in their right. Dynamic idle just gives you a little bit more braking force for when you chop the throttle. Should allow your motors to spin down a little faster. Same thing for like in prop wash condition will give you like well, it should give you if you have your idle, like your idle on your D-Shot idle set in the configuration tab or in the motors tab in the new configurator. And if you have that set at like 5% or maybe higher, 6, 7, 8, Some of the big things like Cinewhoops or Cine lifters get up to like 10, 12% motor idle. Well, that takes off 12, when you set the D shot idle up that high, that takes off 12% of your braking force. So by introducing dynamic idle, you get back 12% of your braking force because it allows the throttle drop all the way down so that it can apply the full braking force to the motors. So that's really what dynamic idle does. Obviously, if you have your D shot idle really low, like I think the default's 3.5%, I believe. I'd have to look. Then it's only 3.5%. So it's, could you even notice that? I don't know. Thrust linear, kind of the same concept. It's think of it like a TPA, but it acts in both directions. So yeah, it just boosts your PIDs when you're above 50% throttle, or I'm sorry, it reduces your PIDs above 50% throttle and boosts your PIDs below 50% throttle. So if you wanted to kind of apply that to linearize your motor control, whether you need it or not is subjective, I would say. I don't know if it really depends on your ESC settings and things of that nature. Uh, Thrust linear, a lot of people find if you go to 48K PWM rate that adding a little bit more PID strength when you're below 50% throttle helps with motor control because you're getting less braking force with higher PWM, ESC PWM rate. So it kind of helps to compensate that a little bit. Default, Crunk checked in. Yeah, default's 5.5 for D-shot idle. So thanks, Crunk. I appreciate that. All right, so I guess as people kind of roll in here, let me go through some of the stuff. I'm trying to figure out if I should. Let me go through the key to just get all on the same page with PID relationships because this has been out there. It's in all my videos that in regard to PID tuning and but it's not. I don't know if 100% of the people in the hobby are on board. Like I don't know, have this information understood or on board with it, and it's really fundamental. You really have to. You can't. If you think about it, you can't be a mechanic unless you know how an engine works. You just can't do it. You can't be like, oh, I'm going to go fix this engine, but I have no idea how it works. It just doesn't work like that. You have to understand how things work to then be able to tune them up, just like a car engine, right? You can't tune up a car engine unless you know how it works. And a lot of stuff in quadcopter flying, a lot of times people don't want to necessarily understand the stuff, which I can respect because it's not everybody's thing, but they want to fix these problems that they might have or encounter, or things change, and the best way to be able to fix them fairly easily is to have a little bit of understanding about how the stuff works. So hopefully today I can distill it down in a hopefully a very easy method, and then if you have any questions, we can go through that, and I can show you. I want to show you some test results, like I said or talked about earlier. Then we'll go through the Q&A and stuff like that. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat here, of course, as we go. And so here, what do we hear here? A couple of days ago, and haven't done any tuning besides filter tuning. Yeah, PD slide. Yep, exactly. You only need to do a couple things in there. Yeah, that's a good question. So, question there is, when is Betaflight 4.3 going to come out? I don't even know. Let's just look. We can look right this second. The best way I would say to keep an eye on that is just go to Betaflight GitHub and go to here and then just go into pull requests. And then usually I click on milestones And you'll see here, typically there's a due date that will be set. And once that due date's set, that's right now, it's still not set. And typically a month prior to that due date, there is a feature freeze. So no more pull requests will be, you can submit them, but they won't be processed for that release. It will be target. See how these are targeted to 4.3, 4.3, 4.3. So after the feature freeze, any pull requests will be targeted to 4.4, 4.4, or whatever. Maybe it goes to 5 at that point. I don't know. But I haven't seen any of that stuff occur yet. I know I haven't seen anything on. It's not like I pay attention to Slack every day. But the other thing you can do is go into the Betaflight Slack and uh, see if there's any announcements there. I don't recall seeing any, but like I said, I've been on vacation and I have a little bit of a head cold, if you can probably hear it. So like this week, I didn't feel too great. Wasn't COVID, I know, because I got tested, and it wasn't. But the other thing you can do is pop into the general here and see if there's any announcements on it. And I don't believe there's any. So if anybody in the uh, chat here knows anything otherwise, I don't think a date's been set. I know the guys are working towards it, but that's you're kind of to some extent always working towards it. You can see I haven't been in this long in a while, and but I don't know. I don't know that there's a great rush from the dev side to do it. I know one thing we want to get done is, and it's on my radar. Let me move this over here so I don't give away any private conversations, but is to get the dang configurator updated to have the new slider stuff in it, which I didn't do yet. So I'll be working on that. Yeah, I don't see anything in here specifically giving it away. So yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, to some extent, the way I look at it as well is it's if you kind of think about it, it's already my question is Falco X on a stable release yet? Because last time I checked, now it was a while ago, I don't check often, might have been a year ago. It's still on beta. So if you're some of these firmwares like they never go to stable release. Well, in that respect, Betaflight 4.3 has been out forever. It just you can go flash it right now. Just go into the configurator and flash it. Now it's a nightly build, so buyer beware. But I don't know. You can flash it at your own risk. It's not a stable release. A stable release obviously is a little bit more vetted than a nightly that has new stuff coming in. Yes, Crunk says no. Falco's an alpha forever. Is it? It actually, that's an actual legitimate question. Is Falco X in a stable release? Because I know it's like I feel like Preston might do that for like a liability thing or something, where he just always keeps it in beta. I don't know why exactly. It's interesting to me a little bit, but but yeah, it always seems like that stuff's in beta. It's stable, not old. Okay, good. So maybe it isn't stable. Good. I know I was giving him a hard time about that. As far as I know, Brian White, Good Toolbox says, as far as I know, lots of the best stuff is already merged into the master, but the development builds are always used on your own risk. Yeah, Brian, I don't know of any target uh, release date. I think it really comes down to Mike Keller, as far as I'm aware, is setting a date, and I don't think Mike's in any rush because it's probably a lot of work, and the people that really want to fly it and use it do now. So I'm not sure. It always comes with a little bit of drama whenever Betaflight releases, since it's the most used firmware. But all right, well, that all aside, let's get into this. So I drafted up, and hopefully this isn't too over the top. But let's do this. I really would like to have my image there, but it cups it off. No, it's not very good. Yeah, well, I'll deal. So in PIDs, there's key relationships between the terms. And the key relationships are what's so important. It's not the gains themselves, it's the relationships between. So the first is there's a relationship between the filters and the D term. It's this arrow that matters. You can have any given D term for any different given filtering. What is the difference? It's the ratio kind of between the two. If you have a lot of D term, you typically need a decent amount of filtering because your signal needs to be really smooth. If your D gains are lower, well, then you can have less filtering. So it's that relationship between the two. Well, the same thing goes for the P term to the D term, right? If you have a lot of D term, you are going to need a lot of P term because you're dampening the heck out of, that's what the D term is, dampening. It's so when the quad wants to move left or move right and you command a stick input, that D term is fighting that. Or if the wind pushes the quad, the D term is going to fight that. It doesn't want the thing to move. So that's what the dampening term does. Makes sense, D for dampening. So I don't even say D for derivative. That just confuses people. That's what it is on the gyro signal from a math standpoint, but just think of D for dampening. The P term is the pushing term, right? So it pushes the quad to stay on track where your sticks are. So I know the definition is proportional, but just think of it as a pushing term. Then finally, there's the I term, and there's a relationship between the P and the I term as well. And I have a video on that. If you're watching this in post, I'll put it down in the video description. But that's a key relationship here. When you have wobbles where your quad is wobbling, as it's flying forward or something, typically you'll see it for cine lifters or bigger things. That's because their I term is too high in relation to the P term, not the I term in relation to the D or the I term in relation to the filtering. It goes in this order. These arrows are what matter, not the gains themselves. It's really the relationship between these terms. So it's just important. And we refer to them as P.I. and D, but it really should be, I think it would be simpler if it was DPI, just for the concept of grasping this. So flight PIDs, flight to PIDs, the key that messes people up for tuning is what, that's great that you have these relationships, but what does that mean, as far as adjustments? Well, when you adjust, when you want to adjust this relationship and get better nose tracking, you really want to adjust the relationship between your D and your P term. You would raise the I term to come along for the ride because we only want to adjust one thing. We want to adjust and get better nose tracking or better throttles. If you're punching the throttle and you want to get better tracking on that, one part of that, and then there's little side features like anti-gravity and things, but the core fundamental is you need more P term so that the quad stays on the nose. Or if you're in prop wash and you're getting like a jerk move, when you're getting on the throttle and it's kind of the nose is jerking over or jerking off course and then coming back and then you get some oscillations at the same time, you need more P term to keep that quad following and staying on your sticks. So when you adjust this arrow, this relationship, you want this term to come along at the same time, because if not, if you just move P up and don't mess with I, well, now you're adjusting two things at one time. And maybe you don't want to or realize that. And then you start to chase your tail because you're adjusting one term at a time, fixing one thing, and then something else goes wrong. And then you change that thing. And then now it messes something else up. And you get these compounding effects, and I think people get confused. So that's key. Of course, the relationship of what are we changing if we want to mess around with the P to I relationship. Well, that's this arrow, this combination. If you have wobbles, again, slow oscillation or wobbles, you're going up and hopping off the throttle, and then the quad is kind of wobbling around, your I term may be too high in relation to your P term, so you need to bring your I gains down. So that's kind of like the last and final term. So again, that relationship is paramount. Once you have these things tuned, so you maybe increase P a little bit, reduced I a little bit, that's generally what Betaflight on the current defaults you would need to possibly tune up a little. Typically P is a little low for Betaflight and it needs to go up. And I is pretty high as a default. And sometimes I needs to come down for like a cine lifter, things like that. So these two moves I just showed where P went up a little bit and I went down a little bit, that's not out of the possibility of things you might need to tweak on your quad. Maybe the default is perfect for you. It really just matters on the moment of inertia, how heavy it is, all kinds of stuff. So again, if you want better nose tracking, you want the thing to stay on course better and not move off the sticks, have a tighter feel, you're going to raise the relationship between the D and the P turn. That is what's going to keep it on track. And then if you're getting wobbles when you're raising that, or just in general, you're going to want to reduce your I turn in between these two things. So that flight, what I'm seeing to what adjustments I need to make, that's the translation piece that it'd be really good, future video, to have an index of what's what. This is a big one. When you want to increase your prop wash performance, you raise them all. You move the whole thing up. Like if your nose tracking is good and your wobble is good, you really are raising your D term to increase prop wash performance. But with that, the P and the I come along for the ride. Because if you just raise the D, well, now you're going to mess up. You could start to be over dampened again, and they will have a looser feel. If you just raise D and leave P and I alone, because now you're raising D, which can help with prop wash performance, but now you're going to make it more sluggish for stick inputs because that D term is fighting your stick inputs. So the only way to do that appropriately without just raising D and then messing up other stuff is you got to raise everything together or lower everything together if you're getting like trilling oscillations or something like that. So that fundamental of, you raise it all or reduce it all to, prop wash performance is a huge part of flight performance in general, right? We're always looking for better prop wash performance. So you really want to move them all up or move them all down. People will say raise your D term, but what they really mean is raise your D term and then take the rest for the ride. And you can see hopefully here why the sliders make all this much easier, right? Because if not, you have to do a lot of math because it's not just, I'm going to raise D10, then I'll raise P10 and I10, which is just annoying in general. It's the ratio between the two. So if you did take D divided by P and that the difference is double, say it's the P term is double your D term for maybe like a high performance racing rig or something like that. If you raise D up by half, you're going to have to raise P up by a heck of a lot more because if you raised D up by, say that P term is double your D term, if you raised D up by 5 points, you have to raise P up by 10 now. So it's not just you move, each of them up 5 points, which is fairly easy. There's no math in your head. You have to do the ratio, obviously. When it's double, that's pretty straightforward. But what if it's 1.36 is the difference between the two? So now you raised P up or D up 5 points. Now you got to raise P up times whatever that 5 points times 1.31. I don't know about you. I need a calculator for that. I don't know what that is in my head. So you can see where the sliders do all that kind of for you. So with that, I wanted to show you some stuff that we went through just to confirm all this stuff. Like, this is not a hypothesis. This is tested and vetted, and this is how it works. So again, back to the credit of Brian. He's on the chat here as well. He did a bunch of testing because we were talking about slider changes for Betaflight 4.3, and just the best way to implement those moving forward, and this whole DPI relationship, and just to make sure the best way to get all on the same page is, vet the stuff out. If you do tests and they keep showing the same result, the confirming result, well, then it's what you're saying is not a subjective thing. It's objectively true. So that's what this was for. And in this testing, we set I term to 0. Brian set I term to 0. You can see on both sides. And in this one, he held the P term, right, at 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. And these are just different flights on the same quad, back to back to back, and just doing moves like this, right? Just doing twitch moves back and forth. I think it's what we would call basement tuning. And then increased is D term. And you can see that as D went from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 80, you can see what that did. Now, if you're not familiar with these plots, basically what this is showing is when he induced a twitch move, so he took the sticks and moved them over like that, like just whoop. When he did that on this one here, this dark red one, when P is 50 and D is 20, what this plot is showing is that the quad, instead of going like this to just follow his sticks, actually went like this, went past it a little bit, and then bounced back. That's what we call bounce back, right? Bounced. So it went whoop, whoop, like that. Now, it happened very, very fast, but, it kind of went past and bounced back. Now, it happened way, way, way faster. Probably so fast he couldn't see it in his goggles. I don't think he had goggles on. I think he was just doing line of sight. But you wouldn't be able to see it. It's just this such a quick it's a little bit of an overshoot and a bounce back. And obviously, if you keep exaggerating this, say you held 20 here and keep moving this up, that would get worse and worse and worse. So this is called overshoot. This is the overshoot part, if you hear that term. And this is the bounce back. It's bouncing back to where you told it to be on the sticks, and then it holds that. And you can see as we increase the D term, that overshoot got less. And at this point, where it was this orange here, there's just a little hint of overshoot there. But this, I would say, burnt orange, you can see that there's no overshoot. I mean, it basically comes up and hits that line. I guess there's this slightest, maybe classify this slightest little less, but it's really between these two, this dark burnt one and this kind of lime green, I guess, color you call it. So in between those two iterations, you can see that there's no more bounce back. Now we're going into this over dampened condition, right? Where it's, we have so much dampening terms that when he's moving the sticks, instead of the quad snapping to it, it's kind of rolling to it. It's just not getting there. So it will, I mean, it gets there. I shouldn't say it's not getting there. It gets there. It's just slower. It's over dampened. And in that case, it might feel a little bit disconnected, a little late and a little sluggish, and if you're doing acro freestyle stuff. So you generally don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. You want to be right here, and then we call this critically damped. So that's what we're trying to find out. That ratio. What's that optimal ratio? And you can see for this quad, it's 1-to-1. So it just happens to be that the D and the P, when they're the same setting. For this quad, I think it was probably a whoop, if I had to guess, something like a little micro or something. That when the two are the same, that's called critically damped. That's where you want to be. So there you go. Now, that was holding the P term and then raising the D term. It doesn't matter how you get to this. In this example over here, and you might be saying, well, they don't look the same. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. In this example over here, you can see that we are, oh, let me move this down a little bit. My head's in the way. Ah, why can't I grab that? Okay. Snap to the bottom. Why don't you snap? That's weird. There, okay, well, whatever. So in this example right here, let me just, I guess, move it over here for now. In this example right here, we're holding the D term and then raising the P term. And long story short is you can see that we're way over dampened down here. And then that comes up, but this is not as drastically under dampened, but it's starting to get there. And again, this burnt orange, 50-50, is where you're critically damped, right? So you can see there's two ways to do it. You can hold the D and raise the P, or hold the P and raise the D. Either way, you're gonna, on your stick inputs, doesn't matter. It's a ratio between the two. One's in the numerator, one's in the denominator. Move them, adjust them, get to this critically damped thing. So that is, a key to understand, right? Doesn't matter between the ratios which one you're raising or lowering. Now you might say, well, why don't these plots look the same in two different methods to get to the same thing? These plots should look the same. Well, the key is you have to understand that the ratios aren't 1-to-1. So if, like, for example, here you take 50 divided by 20. In this scenario, this is 50 is 2.5 times 20, right? To give you that overshoot. So let's take the least dampened one here. So that would be this bottom one in this scenario. Let's take 80 divided by 50. That's only 1.6. That's why this blue curve does not look like this dark red curve up here, because they're not the same ratio. If you keep adjusting this, keep moving this 80 up, so it would be 50 times 2.5. This would have to be, instead of 80, it'd have to be 120. So that this blue line would equal exactly what this, it's different flight, so you have a little bit of fluctuation of error, but it would look the same as this other line over here. So that's why these plots don't look the same, but you can see either way. So the reason I'm talking about this is in Betaflight 4.3, you're going to have two ways to get to your critically dampened. You can either raise D or raise P and I, whichever way you want to do it. And you can, just to get to this critically damped thing, you can just do it by flight feel. Honestly, if you don't have any issues and it flies good, I wouldn't even worry about it. Usually you have a pretty good window of where you need to be in that. But if you want a little bit of better nose tracking, things are wobbling off a little bit, you want to tend towards pushing up P or reducing D. You want to have that ratio higher, a higher ratio of your P and D term to get a little bit better nose tracking. Like I showed in that original plot here, if you want better nose tracking, you're going to either hold D and raise P and I, or you're going to hold these two and lower D. Pick one. It doesn't matter. You're trying to get to that ratio where you get that nice critically dampened thing. So that's that. The other key thing that was done in some testing here that I wanted to bring up, and then we can go into a little bit of Q&A sesh, is go back over to here. If you move this, where is my stuff? Oops. Hopefully I didn't mess anything up here. Let me click on this, click on this. See if I can get back to some of these see if there's any questions. So let me, before I go into the next thing, is there any questions on that? I'm going to try to get back into my page here. Livestream. I closed the control window for the live stream, so that's not helpful. There we go. Danger, danger. Laugh out loud. There's no reason not to have the auto tune button. Yeah, there's definitely a reason to have an auto tune button, not have an auto tune button. We could talk about that in a second. Any questions? Ignition FPV high marks for the Cinewhoop. It's going up to 0 throttle. Can it be tuned out, or is it just a inherent? I have a particular 0 throttle. My turn is building up on y'all. So Ignition FPV has a I don't understand what you mean by spooling up on 0 throttle. So like you're on the ground, I say Ignition FPV. If you're on the ground and the term and the you're armed, but it starts to split, that's normal because it's trying to change the angle of the quad, and it's not allowing it to. It's the I-curve just keeps building. You have to be in the air. If that's, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're talking about there. Yeah, I totally agree. If auto tune would be easy, we'd have it. The problem with auto tune is it's these plots. Go in the P.I.D toolbox and put a bunch of logs in on your, I don't know, what is it? What do you probably have nowadays for a computer? Maybe a 2.4 gigahertz machine, multi-core processor, probably, right? 4 cores minimum. So it's 2.4 times 4. That's how many gigahertz you have available. 16 gig of RAM. Load up a couple of Brian's logs. Hit, step response and see how long it takes for that to plot. It only takes 10 seconds. Now keep in, 5-10 seconds, I guess, depends on the computer. Now keep in mind that our flight controller is using, I don't know, depends on your processor, 250 megahertz processor. Really no onboard RAM, and is 50% busy with flying the thing. And how's it going to do the processing plus all the mathematics it needs to do that? We don't have space to put it in the ROM chip to do the calc. So yeah, it's more than meets the eye. If you think it's simple, I think you should submit the pull request and code it up and do it. But all right, so I'm back here. I don't see anything really pressing. If I go I don't see any specific questions in regard to this. So let me hit this last testing that was done. That is key on this, and we'll just go into the normal. So this was the next thing that was tested out and vetted. Is that when you increase your P&D gains together, or your PIDs, and you move them all together, that it's not going to mess up your step response. So in this test here, just zeroed out I term. Ideally, we'd move all these up together all at the same time. So this was just looking specifically at P&D gain because that's how it is in Betaflight 4.2 at least right now. And moving up, 2020 was the critically damped and moved them up, kept this 2020, so then it'd be 30 30, 30 40 40, 50 50, 60 60. And you can see that step response stays the same. It's not like this starts to do big overshoots or gets dampened. Now, the difference you might see here is, okay, well, why? You can see these lines are lagging further back, right? Well, as you have really weak PIDs, your the amount of the rise time, which is what they call it, is going to decrease. So as you move the stick, since the PIDs are weak, it's going to take just a little bit longer before it steps over to move into its to get these motors to spin up to make it, you're jerking the stick over. It's just going to take a little bit longer for it to actually make that move, because with low PID values, you need more stick input to get an equivalent reaction. So if you have your PID values but give it double the stick input, then it would be about the same. But if you give it the same stick input but have all your PID values, well, then it's going to be, slower. I don't know if it's not going to be half as slow, but it will be a slower reaction because the gains are lower altogether. So that's why you see this rise time decreasing right here as these gains are basically going down. So this concept here of, okay, well, if I want to increase my prop wash performance, I just raise them all together. If I want to decrease something else, I just lower them all together. As long as you hold these ratios between these other two, it's not like when you increase these or decrease these that you're going to mess up, other things like, let's just say, go to here. You're not going to mess up your nose tracking if you move all your PIDs up and move all your PIDs down. You're not going to start to get throbbles or wobbling if you move them all up and move them all down. You're going to not induce other issues if you're simply moving them all together. You're going to basically moving them all together up or moving them all together down is going to really, for all intent and purpose, increase or decrease your prop wash performance. So how does this all come together with Betaflight and tuning? Bottom line is you really only have a couple of sliders for tuning. This one deals with, and don't worry about, seeing what it adjusts up here. In Betaflight 4.2, this one up here, the P.I.D balance, that's that balance between the P and the D term. This adjusts your step response. This adjusts your prop wash performance. We can talk about feed forward, but this adjusts your feed forward, would adjust your stick response. This part over here, if I go back into Brian's graphic, I didn't really get into the feed forward, but more stick response will increase, will make this rise time get shorter. Basically, feel more connected to your sticks. So in all, and when you really boil these down, for a 5-inch quad, you're most of the time it's just messing with this P&D gain or moving the master slider up and down to increase or decrease your prop wash performance. If you have throbbles or other things, you can make those adjustments in obviously other sliders. So there's going to be some tweaks in Betaflight 4.3 to make this even a little more simpler. But when you really come down to it, the key is understanding it's the relationship in between those terms are what matter. And then also, if you want to adjust and fix a problem, you really need to do it to some extent through the sliders, unless you want to just do it all manually, math-wise. So hopefully people can see that the sliders are there to kind of make things easier. And I think in the future, what we're going to do is, instead of having these P&D balance and P&D gain, hopefully we have those a little bit more named, a little bit more simply, like prop wash and stick tracking or tracking slider, things like that. So with that, if there's any other questions or any patrons or anybody that want to jump on, yeah, Crunk T does have that hex. Yeah, gotta get that. We can go through that stuff or any other questions. But yeah, I think that was the long and the short. I'm trying to see if there's any other tests in here that went through. Oh yeah, and this was, let me go through this, open this final one up here. This final test here was showing that the consistency, because he did a bunch of different tests, right? The one was increasing the P, holding the D. The other one was increasing the D, holding the P. And then there was another flight where it was increasing the PIDs, the P and D all together. And in all cases, when it was 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, and on all three different flights, this was all the same result. So you can see that in all those different flights, that the consistency between the data sets was there. So this was kind of like control, I guess you would say, for the accuracy of what we're seeing between all those things. So what I thought was the real big takeaway from all this was, it's not just me saying this stuff. It's so you can see the direction of where things are going. This core fundamental of how this stuff works, these interactions between the terms. This is 100% at the basis of what drives how we're trying to get these sliders positioned to make things super simple for people to not only just do a custom tune, but even if you load a preset and the preset's like really good, but you have this one thing, like, well, what is the one thing? Well, I have a little throttle. Okay, well then move your I-term down, move your I-term slider down a little bit. Done. Because even the best preset might not be perfect, or this preset's really good, but I wonder if I can get a little bit better prop wash performance out of it. Well, increase the prop wash performance slider a little bit. See if it makes it better. If it doesn't, then put it back to where it was. I kind of start with the preset and then, kind of go from there. You make tweaks and adjustments. So, because just remember, any given preset is it's just a default. That's all it is, right? It's just a starting point. And it's a starting point that might be a little bit closer to a specific quad class, like a cine lifter, things like that, a whoop. But it's just a default. It's not a custom tune for your specific rig. You might have little changes. Might be perfect. You don't know. You don't know until you try it. All right. Look at that here. There we are. All right. So Ken Porter asked, if you can change the PIDs manually, does it reflect back to the sliders? No, it does not. That would be nice, but extremely difficult to code. So as of in Betaflight 4.2, Ken, if you change the PIDs manually, it shuts off the sliders. That's how it will be. If I can, I have to figure it out. We know how to do it. It's just complicated enough to make that occur. It's more complicated to make that occur in Betaflight 4.3 because the PIDs aren't calculated in the configurator anymore. In Betaflight 4.2, when you move the slider, the configurator calculates the new PID values. You can see them update in the grid. And then when you hit save, it pushes them to the flight controller. In Betaflight 4.3, when you move the slider, it tells the flight controller the new slider position. The flight controller calculates the PIDs because it's doing it now. And it sends the PID values back to the configurator to be displayed on your page. And why was that change made? Well, people really wanted to have the sliders, including myself, in the OSD. So you can adjust and have sliders in the OSD. Well, when you're out in the field, you don't have the configurator plugged in. So the only way to do that is calculate the PIDs in the firmware. Well, if you're calculating the PIDs in the firmware, then you got to calculate the PIDs in the firmware. But then it's a fundamental change. So what's more difficult about when you type in the PIDs manually in the configurator now for it to shut off the sliders is that it's interesting, but the lag, the USB, go from your PC to it's only microseconds, but nevertheless, it becomes difficult to do stuff because there's a lag when you hit some buttons or when you move a slider it's got to calculate the new PIDs, and as it's doing that, if the PIDs aren't the same in the configurator, then it will shut off the sliders. So you don't want it to do that. So you have to like deal with it. It's not super easy. But in Betaflight 4.3, the intent is that when you adjust the PIDs manually, it will shut off the sliders because there's really no way to go the other way around. But I think on the Betaflight 4.3, you're going to have additional sliders. I can show you here that you're not really going to need to adjust the PIDs manually. I won't. I don't know why you would need to. So you're going to have they're not going to be exactly like this, but you're going to have an iTerm slider in Betaflight 4.3, and you're going to have a PD, you're going to have a pitch roll slider here as well. So to adjust that. So sometimes people were turning those off, in 4.2 because you didn't have that control, which made a lot of sense. And you're also going to be, excuse me, you're also going to be able to decouple yaw if you want to have your own specific yaw stuff. So you could put in, you can see it's doing it here, but you'd be able to decouple yaw and then just put in whatever values you want for yaw without it adjusting stuff. Might have. Maybe that whole turn-off thing is already done. I have to look. It looks like it might be. It looks like somebody else might beat me to the chase on that, which is great. All right, any other questions? Yeah. Rise time. So Brian clarifies that rise time is called latency there. Specifically, it's the latency at half height, 0.5 points of the chart. I think this is an important metric as well, because when you increase PID gains, yeah. So what Brian's saying in his comment is that this rise time, they call, in PID Toolbox, it calls latency. So obviously, yeah, right over here. So you can see as you're, let me go to this graphic here. So you can see as you're increasing your, make sure I got everything displayed right here. Yep. As you're increasing your gains, your P&D gains together, and the I would go along for this ride as well. We were increasing that. Like if this was 20, 20, 20, 30, 30, 30, 40. If these were all one-to-one, that would be the easiest way to look at that. Then this, you'd see the same characteristic that this, you can see here is latency. Your stick input is dropping down. So this is the funny part about, it's not funny, but so we talk about, there's this like Express LRS and Ghost and all these other, I don't think people realize without feed, these are with 0 feed forward. Without feed forward, look how much latency you get, 31 milliseconds. We're talking about like, is Ghost 2 milliseconds versus Express LRS in 3 milliseconds or 3 to 4 milliseconds, or Express LRS better than blah, 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 blah. You got 31 milliseconds here. You better start using your feed forward if you really want to focus on chopping some latency there. Your control link is one part, but your PID loop has quite a bit of latency, without feed forward. And this is, because obviously the only thing that's pushing the quad right now is the P term. Like again, the D term is fighting it. The P term is pushing it. So as you're increasing your P term, that's, reducing this latency here to jump into the move in any stick input. But that P term is based on error, PID error. So it's got to read, where your stick is at, where's the quad at, what's the difference? Okay, there's a difference there. I'm going to go ahead and give it a signal to push it. Well, you have to have error to begin with, where feed forward just measures the stick input and starts to push right away. So that's what Brian was saying. Your rise time, I refer to as rise time, is referred to latency here. And one way to decrease that is to push up your P&D gain strength together, and then or push up your PIDs, and then also, of course, adding in feed forward, because you'll never close the gap. The best way to decrease your rise time is to use feed forward. Beeped Tube asks, I got my 6-inch quad on 2407 and 2408 motors flying pretty well by starting with the crunk presets and tweaking from there. They seem to like being close to a 1-to-1. Yeah, absolutely. When you have what I found is that the different quad classes in general have certain characteristics. So, like on my website here, uavtech.com, literally reused some of the images because the ratios between stuff seem to line up. As your quad, like for example here, you'll start to see, well, without getting into too much details, you'll start to see whoops require about a 1-to-1. P.I.D balance, the ratio between the P and the D gain. And then you'll see that kind of taper down. So in Betaflight 4.2 terms, or 2 terms, that goes to about a 0.8 to 1.2, and varies for a 5-inch, same thing. Usually you can cheat that down where you can have your P gains can be higher than your D gains. But then as you go back up to like a 6-inch, 7-inch, 9-inch, 10-inch, you start to get back to that again, where the P and D gains are about a 1-to-1 for each other. So just off the bat, and that's where like presets are helpful, right? Because you can just load these presets or crunks presets, or Betaflight 4.3 is going to have presets, hopefully, that, just based on your different quad class, like that will get you half of the way there. And then, or more than half the way there. A good preset can get you pretty dang close. And then you can just tweak in using the sliders for any other little things you want to check out or solve any other little issues. But so yeah, no doubt that whoops, it's basically stuff that's not as powerful. So the least, if you have a quad that is heavier, like a cine lifter, or a cine whoop, or just a whoop, or a 6-inch, 7-inch, are usually, and it's not so much the weight, like the all up weight, it's really the moment of inertia. So when it has a higher moment of inertia, means it's harder to get that weight to spin because it has a huge red camera up top, or it's just the motors are really weak, like a whoop. And it has, ducts and stuff that has to get rotating. So obviously the more weight that's out farther, that makes the moment of inertia go up. So for example, like this, it really threw me off. Like this quad that I tuned, this 10-inch, super light, unbelievably light. This idled at 12% throttle. A 5-inch, for reference, and I'm sure you guys know, it idles at like, I don't know, 25, 35% throttle, 12%. So idle so low that if you would take it off and give it a sharp stick input, it would not trigger it would think it's a flyaway, because you have to get to 25% throttle as the threshold for the anti-TAS or whatever to turn off. So I had to like adjust that down. It broke a prop because of that, which wasn't even I was tuning it for somebody. So I kind of felt bad because these props aren't cheap. I mean, they're not the end of the world, but they're not, it's not $3 for a pack of 4. It's like $4 for one or more. So, so yeah, super, super light. However, the moment of inertia was huge because you have these tri-blade props way out there on the arms, with big motors way out there on the arms. And so the PIDs on this, if you can see, are actually inverted, where your P is lower than your D. You had, it's not even a 1-to-1. Your P wasn't higher than the D, like on a 5-inch. It was lower than the D because of that weight being so far out. But the overall weight of the quad was super light. I mean, it was a really light quad because it was just if you look at it, it was just it's just basically a 5-inch with really long arms. And this was a 10-inch quad. What else we got here? Ignition EV asks, Cinewhoop Q, the Cinewhoop Q, zero throttle in the air while descending. You can hear the motor spooling up from zero, and it can't descend as fast. Black box logs show I term on yaw causing that. It's a Cinewhoop. So I've seen that on like a Cinelifter, an octocopter, where excuse me again, where the I term was winding up. So what you need to look at, and I don't know that they solved it. I can't remember. I was trying to help somebody solve that same issue on this octocopter. So it was more complicated because where you got 8 motors. But ultimately, when he was chopping the throttle, your quad is wanting to yaw to the left or to the right. And your motors are spinning up to stop that movement. So the key is, why is your quad trying to yaw to the left or to the right when you chop the throttle? You need to solve that because the pit controller is correcting it, so it doesn't allow it to do it. If you drop your I term on yaw, which you really need your I term on yaw, it will stop to do that, but then your nose is going to drift over. So ultimately, what imbalance, aerodynamic or something else, is causing your Cinewhoop to want to yaw when you're at zero throttle? Best advice is to check to make sure in your logging, like look at your motor traces. Are all the traces lining up? I really don't have a great solution for it because I don't know what would cause it. It's some aerodynamic feature. He had the same issue when he was, and what was going on is when he would flip over and then dive, drop to zero throttle. Again, it would want to yaw in one direction or another. The I term would build up to not allow it to do it. But then when you pull out, the I term was built up, so it would yaw till I term got resettled. And my only thought now in this octocopter had like a red camera on it, is that as he's going down, the wind is pushing on it from one side, and it's kind of pushing the nose over, and those are like top heavy too. So I'm like, well, if you're not perfectly going down, the camera's going to try to drag, like it's basically a center of gravity imbalance. So take a look at your center of gravity and see if there's some shifting moment. If you have a Cinewhoop and then you have like a GoPro, that could probably be like equivalent to like this big octocopter with 8 motors, but then has this 1.6 kilogram or 1.4 kilogram red camera on it. So it could be proportionally equivalent to that scenario. Maybe you're falling into the same thing. If you're trying to do a drastic move, maybe, and this camera is a good part of the weight and it's up heavy and it's trying to drag it over. So my best advice is to take a look at that. Ken Porter said, too bad. So it's not just running the math in the other direction. He's talking about, running so if you're adjusting the PIDs, that it's adjusting the sliders. Yeah, it seems simple on the surface, but if you've ever coded stuff, it's more than meets the eye to do that. That's like a whole nother routine. Uh, but yes, I think I'm not going to add it. So anybody can add that feature to, it would be the firmware side. Code it up, submit it in, and then it will do that. But it just takes somebody willing to do that. And then what will happen is you'll start and you'll think it's something simple, and then you find out that there's a lot of complexities to actually getting it to work right, and it will take more time than you think. But nevertheless, it can still be done. That's why it's not in there. It's just nobody is has done it. Nobody's made it the priority. So 661 FPV asks, what's the difference between a radio baud rate and refresh rate? Like 400K baud and 250 kilohertz. So the baud rate is the communication between. I don't have my radio here. The baud rate is going to be the communication between the um, the OpenTX or the transmitter to the module. That's going to be your communication rate between there. When they're talking about refresh rate, that's the packets that are being submitted over the air from either the radio or if you have a module, whatever. If you have your module going to the receiver, it's sending packets of information. It's not sending a continuous stream. It's not analog. It's digital. So in digital, you're going to get, it's sending a um, 2 millisecond packet or 4 millisecond or 6 millisecond in length packet that says the sticks are here. Then after 6 milliseconds or 2 or 4, depending on let's just say it's 4 milliseconds. You're using TBS tracer. After 4 milliseconds, then it will say, okay, now the sticks are here. Then another 4 milliseconds goes by. Then now your sticks are here. So every 4 milliseconds, it's sending another packet of information telling the flight controller or telling the receiver, which then tells the flight controller, sorry about that, where the sticks are. So that's the difference. And the baud rate is the communication rate between, I guess, the OpenTX, the radio, and the module itself. Obviously, the higher baud rate, the more information can be transmitted between the two things. Dennis Matt Vach asks, what PID changes for switching to a heavier battery? The biggest one, I would say, in general, can affect multiple things. I wish it was simpler. I would say the biggest thing it's going to affect is that P to D balance, because you're going to change your moment of inertia. It should not affect if it's just a little battery change, like you're going from a 1500. Honestly, if it's like a 5-inch quad and you're going from a 1500 milliamp battery to a 1000 milliamp battery, it shouldn't change that much in anything. It should be fine. Now, if you're going from a 4S battery to a 6S battery, it's going to change a lot. The biggest thing is the battery's heavier, but then you have more power too. So it's kind of hard to say if it would actually change different parameters. But one thing that's changing is your moment of inertia. If it's a heavier or lighter battery, I'm assuming that's what you're asking. That's a heavier or lighter battery. So your moment of inertia could definitely change. If that changes, that's your P to D balance. Your prop wash performance shouldn't really change. Could have an effect on your. I would say the main thing is the PD balance. I mean, it could affect the I term, the balance between the P and the I term for like wobble stuff, right? Because your moment of inertia is a little higher. Maybe you need a little, but the I term has a really large window. The P and D balance have a really large window as well. I guess I wouldn't. My default is I wouldn't. I'd tune it with one, fly it. If you put on the new battery and something feels different, what is that thing that feels different or changed? If it's feeling like it's a little less responsive on the sticks. It's not, increase you need a little bit better nose tracking. Obviously, it would increase uh, your PD balance. You get a little bit more P term. If it's, prop wash performance goes down, try increasing your prop wash, all the gains together. I would kind of go from the symptom standpoint to the resolution, not just, it depends kind of on the configuration if it's gonna change what it's going to impact and what adjustments you have to do on it. So if you have a specific issue, that's what I would use as your guide to make PID adjustments to solve it. CHK Noodle, whatever that is. Recently got my PIDs dialed in to the point where I'm happy. Turned out that defaults are near perfect for my 5-inch. I've just raised the master slider to help it more aggressive in stick tracking. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the key, I think, my hope is that with the sliders, right? Or our hope with the sliders, that if you just make a couple little tweaks and just tweak these couple little things, and it's all based in a good fundamental. Ignition SPV comes back and says, yeah, what is your, what you've described makes it sound like it's an inherent to the design. It's a ProTech 35, but it happens, I can see 2 motors at 0 and 2 motors spool up due to the I term. Yeah. It's if you find the solution to that, I'd love to know. It seems like something that can occur with like cine lifters. In this case, that cine lifter was really the cine lifters, like the Syndrome's thick. I think this was a thick. They're inherently kind of out of balance. Like their center of gravity is not close to the center of where like the motors come together, because you have this like huge camera out the front. So you just get weird stuff. And I guess one of the biggest things with those is that your your motors get saturated, or it's trying to compensate for these out of whack center of gravities. And in almost a lot of the cases, you can make it better with PIDs, but you're not going to make it perfect. PIDs can help, but it's not going to overcome that. Like, what's the best advice? Get your center of gravity more near the center of the quad. So that's the best advice on that one. Easier said than done, though. I recognize that. Yeah, Ken. Shaney Bao asks, can horizon mode be used when tuning line of sight? Yeah, absolutely. So you can, I've never used horizon mode or angle mode. You can use either one. But if you have black box and you just go on horizon mode or angle mode and just do twitch moves line of sight, even and you do it on the roll axis, pitch axis, then yaw axis, just do all those moves. You don't need to, it only takes like 20 seconds. Like you need like 15 seconds of flight. It's 15 seconds is longer than you think, right? When you're up in the air, right? It's fairly like 15 seconds starts now. You take off, you're doing your roll twitches, you're doing your pitch twitches, you're doing your yaw twitches, and you land and you disarm. That was just 15 seconds. So even if you double it, 30 seconds. Take that black box log, throw in the PID toolbox. You can use that exact tool I showed. Brian calls it basement tuning, and it shows you what you need to do for your PD balance. And then once you have your PD balance, or confirm like you're good to go there, and it's that critically damped thing, then from there you're just moving up the gains or moving down the gains for better or worse prop wash performance. That's it. If you want better stick response, move up the stick. You want it to be tighter stick response, move up your feed forward stick response slider, and you're done. Tuning simple. Uh, yeah, Masters. Yeah, yeah. Brian was talking about the cine lifters have eight RPM filters on each axis. You have eight motors, right? So it's a lot of notches. I know. But what's funny, Brian, on the cine lifters, they do so well with prop wash performance. I've always noticed. I think it's just they're so heavy that they don't shake because it's like this, you know, it's like the space shuttle flying through the air. It's just like, and it's not like they oscillate or shake because they're just so massive that they just they just don't do that. It's almost like the inherent dampening. Front yard tuning. There you go. Basement or front yard tuning. There you can go. I like basement tuning is a pretty catchy term though, and winter's coming up. Might be practicing some basement tuning. The travesty is that the where you need basement tuning the most, Cinewhoops, or not Cinewhoops, whoops, they don't have black box flash. So it's like it's a killer. I wish more of them had it, but on the sun breath, when I'm flying the whoops around the basement, I don't need it to be that great. I mean, you're just kind of like going forward and dodging chairs and stuff. It's not like you're flipping around and doing all kinds of funky moves. At least I'm not. All right. Okay. Well, got 10 minutes left here. If there's anything else, yeah, reasonable prop wash shaking. Yeah. See if there's anything else. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions or anything like that. And with that, I'll probably head out. If anybody has anything further, we'll have about 10 minutes in the stream. But a lot of times I go late, so maybe I'll wrap up early. Thank you. Figured is starting higher strength. How big of a difference does prop weight make? So one question is, how big do the differences prop weight make? Makes a huge difference. Um, Prop weight and uh, angle of attack or your pitch of your prop. The higher the weight and the higher the angle of attack, generally the lower PID performance you'll have. The motor can only update so fast, right? It depends on the motor strength. But for a given motor strength, if you're not going to change the motor, it can only update so quick. So the lighter your prop and the lower the angle of attack, it allows it to update faster, which will help it in prop wash performance. So you will get to a spot that you move all your gains up together, the DEP and the I, to increase your prop wash performance, and it just won't get better. And it doesn't matter what you do. So like, I can't get rid of this, I can't make this prop wash any better. No matter what I do with the PIDs. It's like, yeah, because your motor, you're maxing out how, the PIDs are commanding the motor to update faster than it can update. Think of the motor as like a giant low pass filter. Um, if that even rings a bell or anything, if you know what low pass filters are. They can only update so fast. So once you've hit that limit, it doesn't matter how much you tell it to update faster with higher PIDs and stuff like that. It's just not going to update any quicker. And from there, it's like, well, what do I do if I want a little bit better performance? Like, well, do a lighter, lower pitch prop. That's why everybody loves the Mr. Steel props a lot because they're really light and low pitch. And but there's a lot of other ones. Of course, it's not just his, but or get a stronger motor. It's the same size. Um, Go out to Mini Quad Test Bench, and you can look on Ryan Harold's charts there for motors that have more thrust. Uh, And it's not necessarily the thrust; it's the torque. You want to look at the low end part of the curve where it's spinning up, and see what has a little bit more strength and torque there for increasing speed and decreasing, because it could just have better magnets than a motor of the same size, or obviously a motor that has a bigger size will inherently just have more torque to it because it has uh, more volume area for the magnets. So absolutely, props make a big difference. A lot of times, if you want better prop wash performance, get good prop. Get the props that you want on there first, then worry about the tuning part. And if prop wash performance is most times that's like the gold standard. So then you really want the lightest pitch props but then people will say, well, yeah, but it helps with prop wash performance, but I don't like the feel. It's like, well, then you gotta pick one. Like, so a lot of times I have um, sacrificed like raw punch out speed or oomph to get better performance. Like it's easier on the battery too, but I'll sacrifice a higher pitch just to get better prop wash performance because it's better on the battery, longer flight times, um, and better prop wash performance. So yeah, just go with a lighter, lower pitch prop. But that's just me. So higher RPM means more chances to update per revolution. I don't know if I'm understanding that question 100%. So the flight controller is going to give the motors a continuous signal on what speed they want them to be, regardless of the RPM of the motor. The flight controller is giving these motors generally a signal 4,000 times per second if you're at 4 kilohertz PID loop and D shot 300 or higher. So 4,000 times per second, it's telling these motors what RPM to be. So that's a lot. So usually your motors aren't updating faster than 4,000 times per second. So that's where these higher PID loop rates, which is not a thing anymore, used to be a thing three years ago. It doesn't really matter. 4,000, your motors can't update that fast. Your motors can update it like maybe 100 times per second. That's pushing it. 150 times per second, but not 4,000, not even close. And the reason we know that is because if you look at just black box a bunch, you will never see induced, um, you will never see commanded changes to the motor actually reflect in quad movement changes over 100 hertz. And 100 hertz is 100 times per second. You'll never see like prop wash performance. I've seen like prop wash oscillations get up to like 80 hertz, where like the quad's telling it to do this, and then it does that, and it's doing it 80 times, per second. So it's oscillating back and forth, and it's doing that, and so that's that like real quick, where you can't actually see it in the camera, but you can hear it, and it's that fluttery prop wash, and it's like, yeah, it feels good. That's nice. That's a nice, really. It's usually around 60 to 50 hertz, so you can actually see it and you can hear it too. But I've never seen it get to 100. And we're telling the updates at 4,000 times, so we're not even close. An extra millimeter on the motor stator height makes a huge difference. Yeah, and definitely torque and motor performance. Absolutely, for increasing the size. So I don't know some of these YouTube names. REDJT says. Chris would probably say, yeah, also stick to a taller rather than wider motors, less rotational inertia, easier to accelerate and decelerate. Yeah, that makes some sense. You know what I would do? Just go to Mini Quad Test Bench and just look and see what you see there. That's actual test results. Doesn't just look at the different motors you're looking at on there and see if you're seeing a pattern there. But yeah, if your bell is shorter and you're gaining that motor stator volume and height, then you should have less inertia out here to update the speed. And the bell is a pretty heavy part of it. Those magnets are pretty heavy. So yeah, that makes a lot of logic. I haven't looked though to thread that needle between the two to see which is right and wrong. So Bastian Sonderman asks, at full throttle, my props are vibrating. So you can see it. I'm assuming in your HD, you can kind of see the tips of your props kind of going up and down. Is that, I'm assuming, what you're seeing? Because if that's the case, um, unless you're running like a high KV on a 6S, you should not be seeing that. Uh, I would try different props. I know like King Kong props, I used to be able to see that, and they're just bad props. But they should not be oscillating up and down. But you could be getting some aerodynamic effects that are funky. Um, so you could try that. So less than 2 minutes here. I guess I'll take the last question, and it's marked as last question. Uh, so too high for any I term. So Ignition SPV asks again, last question. So too high of an I term would show up as a wobble during the long zero throttle descent, correct? Yeah. So yeah, if you're too high of an I term in relation to P. So if you're going up and chopping the throttle and you're starting to see it like going kind of like oscillating down like that, I'm sure it doesn't look exactly like that, but something of that nature, yeah, you need to either decrease your I gain or increase your P gain. So it's that ratio between those two. The simplest way was just decrease your I turn, and that will reduce that wobble. The best way, you might have to reduce it quite a bit. So make sure your P is up there before you start artificially reducing that I term down. Betaflight's I terms, well, it's just they used to be in the 40s. Well, now they're in the 80s by default, so they're up there quite a bit. So reducing those down, you have some room there. It's not like you're getting to an unreasonable number with bringing those down to 60s or 40s again, things like that. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Hopefully this was some helpful information. And yeah, if you have any other questions, I guess specifically any Patreon stuff, you can throw it in the office hours there. I'll try to get to that. Other than that, we'll see you on the next live stream. Again, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend. Get out there. It's beautiful here at least, but hopefully it's beautiful where you're at as well, and get some flying done.